Back to Jerusalem podcast.
Yeah, I'm back, and I'm armed with righteousness.
With your host, Eugene Bach.
He just seems like he's got it all figured out.
He's a righteous dude.
Yep.
Hello and welcome to another Back to Jerusalem podcast. I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. And this time, I have a very special podcast. This year, we have come out with the best-selling book we've ever had at Back to Jerusalem, JIHAD, The Day I Died. This is unlike any other books that I've ever written. This is about a brother that I've been working with for about 2 decades, but unlike other people that I work with, I only got a chance to meet him a couple of years ago for the first time face-to-face. He is an individual that I've admired from afar for many years. I met Abdull for the first time in a small airport in Athens. After being on the mission field for about 25 years, I've heard his name many times, but I've never had the chance to actually meet him face to face until about 2 years ago. I was asked to meet him and see if it would be possible to write his story. His story is one that he's carried with him for many years, but he hasn't wanted to tell it because he's been working in closed countries. He's been working in Yemen. Guys, I don't know anybody working in Yemen except for this man, Brother Abdull. He currently lives in Afghanistan. He's also spent time working in Syria and Somalia. One of the most fascinating individuals. So I sat down with him. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. We had both spent a lifetime working in closed countries, and we're used to hiding secrets from strangers. So our first conversation didn't go much beyond just the niceties and the pleasantries that you usually have when you don't know somebody. I mean, you don't just jump into a conversation with somebody talking about, the most secret operations that you're doing in closed countries. That can be an issue. So when we first met, both of us had our hesitations. And I didn't know him and he didn't know me. And we both sat down and we tried to get to know one another. And we were sitting at the hotel and we decided, let's meet the next day. And so we did. The next day, however, Abdull suggested that instead of meeting in a restaurant like we did the night before, that instead we go together to this remote seaside village in Greece and simply enjoy the ocean air and take in some good seafood. Anybody that knows me knows that I have my best meetings when I'm sitting at a restaurant eating, especially seafood from the Mediterranean. So we sit down, and to my surprise, over a cup of warm tea and squawking seagulls, God knitted our hearts together, and we talked for hours, mainly about something that we didn't even know about, which is our shared military experience and operations in the Persian Gulf. I didn't know that his background was in the military, and of course, he didn't know that my background was in the military. And after a short time, we just began to swap old stories of smuggling Bibles and running from the police and baptizing people in secret. We shared about our friends who had been arrested and killed for the sake of the gospel. We found out that we had a lot in common. And it was in this place that Abdull opened up and shared things about his life that he had never told anyone before. And many of those stories made it into this book that's called JIHAD, The Day I Died, a true story about Brother Abdull and how he gave his life for Allah, fighting for Allah. Over the next several months, he and I would meet together again and again in different countries, writing and rewriting his story to make sure that we told it with as much honesty and accuracy as possible. I flew around the world even to confirm much of the content of a story and met with countless individuals over the years who verified different aspects of his story because much of it seems to be too amazing to be true, right? And whenever you hear a story that's too good to be true, well, that's why I went around checking his story. And due to the nature of Abdull's life, his ministry and his family members who still live in Iran, Some of the names and places and events and timelines I had to slightly change and alter for the safety of his family and friends. But all of the things that I tell in that book are verified. I've written a lot of biographies. And I have a lot of modern day heroes of faith from Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. But this story, I have to say, is close to my heart. Because of my own military background, I connected to Abdull's story on a deeper level than I've ever done before or been exposed to. As he began to share his life story, it takes place kind of on the pages in black and white of the book in a way that I believe you can hear, taste, smell. You can hear, taste, and smell the sights and the sounds that Abdull is experiencing from the battlefield. And I believe I do better than I'm capable of doing on my own, sharing those experiences to the reader. Why? Because I believe that the words were inspired by the Holy Spirit. And my hope is that this story will impact every reader the way that it impacted me. And more than anything, this book, if you go online right now and look at this book, the story that's called JIHAD, The Day I Died, go and look at this book. On the outside of it, the description of it, there's nothing about it that says Christian. Guys, this is an amazing tool to use for your Muslim friends. Right now, Brother Abdull is working with Muslims, and he wanted to do a book. He wanted his story to be a ministry to Muslims. Now, if you write something that is obviously Christian, it's going to turn off a lot of Muslims before they even touch it. They'll never even get a chance to read it, no matter how good it is, because they'll know that it is haram or forbidden for them to touch. That's why there's nothing about Christianity on the outside. That's why it appeals to many Muslims. Jihad, The Day I Died. And when they pick it up and they begin to read it, they get to see Abdull as he is, a Muslim, the grandson of a Muslim Ayatollah. And he gets to share his story in a way that they can relate to without being turned off. And as he is led to Christ, our prayer is that the book leads people to Christ, that you find yourself empathetic and experiencing Abdull's life together with him. And that as he goes through his life and you get to experience what he is experiencing, then he can share directly with the readers how Christ reached him and what made him convert from Islam to Christianity. My hope is that this story will impact every reader the way that it impacted me, and that it will be a powerful tool to speak to those in the Muslim world who are living with the similar questions to those that are asked by Abdull himself in this book. My prayer is that his life will speak to the lost, reach the broken, and heal the wounded, with all the glory given to the Creator and Father who gives life after death. And what I'm going to do in this podcast is I want to bring you along on the journey and read the first chapter to you, just to kind of give you a free taste of this book, this amazing story. This is chapter 1 of Jihad, The Day I Died. Chapter 1, Death and Life. I killed a man when I was 19 years old. He had the unlucky chance of meeting me on the battlefield. Looking back on it now, he was the stranger I would never forget. I didn't know his name, but I could see his family on the photo that he clutched with his cold, dead hand. I was told that killing him in the war of holy jihad was my ticket to heaven. But back then, as just a teenager, looking down on him, lifeless, on the ground, I felt a torment that was more like hell than heaven. I tried telling myself that I'd only done what I had been trained to do, but it didn't help. An inner voice convicted me. Even though every voice around me was telling me that killing was what I was supposed to do, there was an inner voice that demanded something different of me. And that voice, that same inner voice, has stayed with me all these years. It is a wordless voice that communicates emotion and direction at the same time. It has always made sense to me, even though it did not logically fit with what I had been taught. The voice has always been subtle and polite, but on that high desert morning, standing in the stagnant sun, it screamed with rudely clawing fingernails against my skull and would not let me look away from what I had done. I didn't know the man. He wasn't in my family, so I had no reason to mourn his death. He and his Arab army had invaded my country, and I should have been proud to stop him. But that inner voice would not allow me to rejoice. Instead, it damned me with murder. The dead soldier lay on the ground with an old, crumpled photo in his hand. His photo wounded me more than his weapon. He wasn't my first kill, but he was the first that I'd really stopped to notice. In the fog of war, there isn't time for emotions, only survival. But that morning, I had time for more. Reflection, grief, sorrow, empathy. My inner voice made sure that I listened to it all. Almost 50 years ago now, I was only 19. I felt indestructible, trained by the Shah's best men to breathe life back into what we in Iran call the immortals. The famed immortals of Persia were the most feared elite military unit in ancient history. For almost 200 years, from 550 BC to 330 BC, they powerfully defeated the Persian empire's enemies, and the blood of those 10,000 strong immortal units now run through my veins. I represented the fighting force of my ancestors, but as a Muslim, I represented even more. I was not just a modern-day version of the immortal soldiers of the Persian Empire. I was also a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad and a grandson of an Ayatollah. I walked in the footsteps of the famed mourners and the warriors who followed the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina in the Hijrah and fought holy jihad in the battle of the Badr, leading the conquering of the holy city of Mecca. As a trained mercenary for the Islamic Iranian army, my job was to lead brave Iranian fighters to kill anyone, anywhere, at any time. From the age of 13, I was trained to jump from airplanes at 1,200 feet above sea level, dive and swim in combat waters during day and night, operate a series of different armored battle tanks, handle the most sophisticated small arms weapons, hunt for my food in winter mountains, utilize survival and evasion techniques, and lace bridges and tunnels with plastic explosives. Men fighting holy jihad could be found really anywhere in the Islamic world, but we were different, much different. The fighters, like the dead Iraqi lying in the baking sand in front of me, didn't fear, but they weren't trained. With a gun in his hand, he ran headlong into the fray of the battle, screaming, "Allahu Akbar!" It did neither him nor his family any good. He was not a trained killer. He was a warm body that could hold a weapon. To his commanders, he was nothing more. But to his 2 daughters and his wife in the photo that he was holding in his hand, he was everything. After almost 50 years, the thought of what his precious family lost still brings tears to my eyes. I hated myself for killing him. Why had I done that? For Allah to accept me? To earn my place in heaven? I remember when I was a young man training in the Shah's army. I was told that I would never regret what I lost, but that I would regret what I had never had the chance to have in the first place. In other words, I would never regret what I had done, but rather what I didn't do. Now that I'm older, I know that's not true. I do regret what I've done. I regret pulling the trigger that day. I regret taking the life of a husband, a father and son. I regret allowing the passion to please Allah to lead me into jihad. Long before I was a trained soldier, I was first trained to be a Muslim cleric like my grandfather, an Ayatollah. And it was for this cause that I was deployed to fight the war between Iraq and Iran. The Shah never saw his dream of truly resurrecting the immortal soldiers. His rule was snuffed out in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution flooded the streets and took control of the army to show Iran another version of what it meant to be an immortal soldier, the Shaheed. The Shaheed is the holy warrior that fights for Allah and never dies. He too is immortal. In Islam, he is the true immortal soldier of Persia that fights in the holy jihad. The immortal soldier of Persia never dies because he is quickly replaced by another soldier to take his place. But the Shaheed never dies because his soul lives forever in paradise. He is redeemed through holy war. The Quran teaches, quote, "Think not of those who are slain in Allah's way as dead. No, they live, finding their sustenance in the presence of Allah. They rejoice in the bounty provided by Allah. And with regard to those left behind who have not yet joined them in their bliss, the martyrs glory in the fact that on them is no fear, nor have they cause to grieve." Surah 3, 169-70. You see, the Quran promises no grief for those that die in jihad. But what of those who kill in jihad? Are they also promised paradise? Most of my formative education took place in a madrassa. It was there that it was hammered into me the teachings of Muhammad and the Quran, but neither brought me comfort on that bleak morning. I had zealously carried those teachings with me onto the battlefield, and they failed me. I didn't know it then, but I would one day join the man who was lying dead in front of me. He had no doubt been told that he was fighting a holy war. I would also die fighting the same holy war. I didn't know it then, but one day I would also cross over to the land of the dead after a bomb exploded at my feet and bullets riddled my body. I'd be taken to a morgue, issued a death certificate, and experience my spirit leaving my lifeless body. With my dead body lying in the morgue, I didn't find myself rejoicing in heaven. I found something else, something much darker and more sinister. I died, but I also didn't. My body died, but my spirit lived on. My spirit couldn't be killed. My spirit had life. Life couldn't die no more than death can live. As written many years ago by the great poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, quote, "Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, and dust thou returnest," was not spoken of the soul. Jihad taught me how to die, and in death I began my journey to understand the true meaning of what it meant to live. That is the lesson that I now share in my older age. That is chapter 1 of Jihad, The Day I Died. You can get that exclusively at backtojerusalem.com or on amazon.com. I want to thank you so much for downloading this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. God bless you.